Hare Krishna. So we will resume our discussions on the 14th chapter of Bhagavad-gita, the three modes of material nature. Last time we ended at verse 10, so we'll resume from verse 11. Glories to Srila Prabhupada. So 14:11. Sarvadvareshu deyasmin prakasha upajayate Jnanam yada tada vidyad vivrittam sattvam ityuta. The manifestation of the mode of goodness can be experienced when all the gates of the body are illuminated by happiness. So, in the previous verse, Krishna had noted that there was a conflict for supremacy amongst the three modes. Sometimes goodness reigns supreme, sometimes passion, sometimes ignorance. Now, in three verses, 11, 12, and 13, Krishna talks about what is the symptom of a particular mode being predominant. So, this verse talks about the symptom of the mode of goodness. So, Krishna mentions that all the gates of the body are illuminated by knowledge. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada notes that there are 9 gates in the body: the 2 eyes, the 2 ears, the 2 nostrils, the mouth, the genitals, and the anus. So, what does it mean to say that these are illuminated by knowledge? Essentially, what it means is that the jiva engages these gates as per the knowledge of the scriptures. So, the eyes are constantly seeing things. Now, the scriptures, they also teach us how to process what we see. There are some things that we see and we offer respect. There are some things that we see and we avoid. So, essentially, these 9 gates are controlling our interaction with the world around. And when these interactions are controlled by the knowledge of the scriptures, it's a symptom of the mode of goodness. So people in the mode of goodness, they tend to conduct themselves according to the scriptural injunctions. And the byproduct of this is, so it is said that vivridam sattvam itya uta. So uta means also, means that it also results in happiness because of the nature of the law of karma. That when you follow what has been laid down, and we have practical experience of it, that as long as you're a law-abiding citizen, there's nothing for you to fear. Whether there are cops around or whether there is anything else going on. So as long as you're confident you're abiding the law, there's nothing for you to be fearful about. So similarly, when the jiva is abiding by the scriptural injunctions, it results in happiness. The distress and the dismay and the other modes, that is absent. So there are two aspects of the mode of goodness. One is knowledge and the second is happiness. The knowledge is governed by the scriptures and the happiness is the result of following the scriptural injunction. Okay, let's go to the next verse. Verse 12. Lobha pravritinarambha karmanama samaha spara rajasyeta nijayante vivrite bharatarshaba. O chief of the Bharats, when there is an increase in the mode of passion, the symptoms of great attachment, fruitive activity, intense endeavor, and uncontrollable desire and hankering develop. So the previous verse talked about the symptoms of the mode of goodness. This verse, Krishna talks about the mode of passion. So lobha means that once you get something, you do not want to give it up. Pravritti means the tendency to make efforts to increase one's possession. Then karmanam arambha means to engage in elaborate material projects like building houses or creating large projects for one's pleasure. Then ashamaha means the inability of the senses to give up the enjoyment of the sense objects. And spira means longing for objects that one does not possess. So, putting it together, the mode of passion, it is characterized by a strong desire to possess what you don't have, a strong desire for increasing sense gratification, and for constant endeavor to achieve something. So all these are characteristics of the mode of passion. Next verse. Verse 13. Aprakasho pravratischa pramado mohayevacha tamasyetani jayante vivrate kurunandana. When there is an increase in the mode of ignorance, O son of Kuru, darkness, inertia, madness and illusion are manifested. So this verse talks about the symptoms of the mode of ignorance. So the underlying symptom of tamas is the absence of discrimination. So essentially the Vedas, they teach us discrimination in terms of activities that should be done and should not be done. And in the mode of ignorance, that knowledge is absent. So Prabhupada says that when there is no illumination, knowledge is absent. In the mode of ignorance, one does not work by regulative principles, but they act whimsically. And this is a point that Krishna will make in the 16th chapter also, when he describes the divine and demoniac nature. So essentially he says demoniac are those people who act whimsically with no consideration for the scriptures. Okay, next verse. Verse 14. Yada sattve pravradetu pralayam yati dehabrit tadottam vedam lokan amalan pratipadyate. When one dies in the mode of goodness, he attains to the pure higher planets of the great sages. So the previous verses talked about the behavior that is manifested by the influence of a predominant mode. This verse talks about the destination of one who acts according to this mode. So when one dies in the mode of goodness, they are elevated. And the reason is that when one is living in the mode of goodness, then the actions that they perform are pious actions. And because of the karmic reactions to these pious actions, they will attain the higher planets. Next verse. Verse 15. Rajasi pralayam gatva karma sangishu jayate tatha pralinas tamasi mudayone shujayate. When one dies in the mode of passion, he takes birth among those engaged in fruitive activities. And when one dies in the mode of ignorance, he takes birth in the animal kingdom. So what we see here is a general understanding of the interaction between the modes and the law of karma. That because of the modes, one's propensity is determined. Because of one's propensity, one's activities are determined. And because of one's activity, the reactions to these activities are also determined. So those in the mode of passion, they have strong desires to enjoy materially. So they will take birth in similar forms by which they are able to continue their engagement in fruitive activities. So essentially as humans who are very much addicted to performing material activities. And the mode of ignorance is one in which one does not take benefit of the human form of life. Because the human form of life is one in which one is able to discriminate. And if one is not able to take benefit of that, then that form of life is taken away. So one takes birth in the animal kingdom. Next verse. Verse 16. Karmana sukratasyahu satvikam nirmalam phalam rajasastu phalam dukham ajnanam tamasa phalam. The result of pious action is pure and is said to be in the mode of goodness. But action done in the mode of passion results in misery, and action performed in the mode of ignorance results in foolishness. So these three verses, 16, 17, 18, are basically talking about the result of acting in the modes. So previously we saw one of the results was that it determined your next birth. And essentially these three verses are details, because your next birth is determined by your actions in this birth. So if in the mode of goodness one is elevated, then the corollary is that the actions are going to be pure. In the mode of passion, if one gets born with strong material desires, then the corollary is that there will be misery. That's the nature of passion. That either you strive for things and work hard, or you hanker for things you do not have. Both are miserable conditions. And the results of the mode of ignorance is foolishness, which means a lack of discrimination. Next verse. Sattvat sanjayate jnanam rajaso lobha eva cha pramadamo tamaso bhavato jnanam eva cha. From the mode of goodness, real knowledge develops. From the mode of passion, greed develops. And from the mode of ignorance develop foolishness, madness, and illusion. So the previous verses, so Krishna is kind of moving backwards, right? First he talked about the impact of the modes in your subsequent lives. Then he talked about the culmination of the effect of the modes. Now he talks about the intermediate result of the acting on the modes. So in the mode of goodness, the result is knowledge. Knowledge results in happiness, and the ultimate result is elevation to higher planets. Then mode of passion, Rajagun, the intermediate result is passion and greed. And the subsequent result is that it results in bhoga, in this desire to enjoy materially, and grief. And the ultimate result is one takes birth as humans with unlimited desires. Then tamaso, mode of ignorance, the result is madness, pramada. It results in grief, and the ultimate result is one takes birth as animals. Okay, so let's move on to the next verse. Verse 18. Urdhvam gachanti sattvastha madhya tishthanti rajasaha jaganya guna vritistha adho gachanti tamasaha. Those situated in the mode of goodness gradually go upwards to the higher planets. Those in the mode of passion live on the earthly planets. And those in the abominable mode of ignorance go down to hellish worlds. So what is the chain that Krishna has given us? And just for the sake of Emphasis are repeated from the beginning. Sattva gun, knowledge, happiness. One takes birth as devas, demigods, and gets elevated to higher planets. So the previous verse talks about the body that you get, and this verse talks about which part of the universe you will go in. So Rajagun, passion and greed, results in hankering and grief, take birth as humans, live in the middle planetary system. Tamogun, madness, results in bewilderment and grief, take birth as animals, go down to hellish planets. Now, one does not mean that animals live in hellish planets, but it's kind of either you take birth as animals or you go down to hellish planets and suffer over there. So Prabhupada says that there is an opportunity for the men in the modes of ignorance and passion to be elevated to the mode of goodness, and that system is called Krishna consciousness. So Prabhupada is talking about the benefits of spiritual advancement. So Krishna consciousness is actually beyond the mode of goodness. It's called Shuddha Sattva. It's in the mode of pure goodness, but at the minimum, it will elevate one to the mode of goodness simply by following the regulative principles. Okay, let's go to the next verse. Verse 19. Nanyam gunebhya kartaram yada drashtanupashyati gunebhyascha param veti madbhavam sadigacchati. When one properly sees that in all activities no other performer is at work than these modes of nature, and he knows the Supreme Lord who is transcendental to all these modes, he attains my spiritual nature. So from here till the end of the chapter, 8 verses, Krishna will talk about how to transcend the modes. So he began by first introducing us to what the modes are, 3 modes, goodness, passion and ignorance. He talked about the characteristics of the mode, which essentially means the characteristics of the people who are influenced by the modes. He also explained how the modes are acting in confluence with one another. Sometimes one mode is prominent, sometimes the other, but the 3 of them are acting together. And then he talked about the binding nature of the modes. That because of these modes, one's propensity is determined, how one thinks, what is the kind of activities that one does. Because of that, one's destiny is determined. What is the next birth the person will take, which planet they will take birth in. So we see that how strongly binding these modes are, that they also create the seed for future bindings. Krishna says those in the mode of passion, they take birth with unlimited hankering. Right? So, and that essentially is going to perpetuate that mode. So the modes are self-perpetuating. So then Arjun might say, then there is no hope. If the modes are so strong and they're completely holding the jiva under them, then what hope there is there? So in these set of verses, Krishna will say, yes, there is hope. And the hope is that if one transcends these modes, then they are going to free themselves. So the first thing that Krishna says is, when properly sees that in all activities no other performer is at work other than these modes. So what does that vision actually mean? So it means that the motivation of this action is not attributed to the jiva. So a prison guard may be doing a lot of things as his duty in the prison, disciplining the prisoners, imposing strong rules on them, punishing them if needed. But if he does it with the understanding that this is just my duty, then there is not implicated in those actions. So this is Krishna bringing us back to the notion of working with detachment, but now with more specificity, saying that how do you work in detachment? Initially he was presenting it as a philosophical concept, that nishkam karma, work with detachment. Now he specifically is saying that by understanding that these moods are in play, by understanding that these moods are material, and by understanding that you are spiritual, have nothing to do with the material modes, you will be able to work without attachment. So example would be that if a person is driving a car that is very, very fast, but understanding that he's not going fast, it's the car that is going fast. So sometimes people, when they're driving fast cars, they become very proud, and they will consider those who are driving slower as inferior, because they're associating themselves with the car. But when one begins to get this distinction that, hey, it's the car that's going fast, nothing to do with me. The person in the slow car, if he gets this car, he can also go fast. Then all that pride, all that passion, the ignorance, that goes away, and the person begins to transcend the moods. Next verse. Verse 20. Gunanetan aditya trin dehi deha samudbhavan janma mrityu jara dukhe vimukto mritam ashnute. When the embodied being is able to transcend these three modes associated with the material body, he can become free from birth, death, old age, and the distress, and can enjoy nectar even in this life. So this verse essentially expands on the phrase Madbhavam that was used by Krishna in the previous verse, that he acquires a nature like me, essentially meaning a spiritual nature, not a material nature. So the modes are associated with the material body. When one transcends the mode, then one also gets freed of the symptoms of material existence. Janma mrityu jara dukhe. So it's the material body that forces one to take birth, death, old age, and dukhe is essentially the misery of just the material existence. Now the second point Krishna makes is that vimukto mritam ashnute, that even in this life he can enjoy nectar. So the effect of this is almost instantaneous. So one should not think that maybe in the next life I will start seeing the effects of working with by transcending the modes. But Krishna says right away you will begin to enjoy the freedom, essentially dukher. So janma mrityu jara, of course, these are things that are characteristics of an embodied soul. Krishna says dehi, one who has a material body, but dukher, the material miseries will be remediated right away. So we will stop at this point and finish the last set of verses in our next discussion. Srila Prabhupada ki Jai.